of a mix between urgency and despair on the one hand, and hope and optimism, thanks to Professor Jacobson on the other hand. So I just really want to open it up, and Gerd, I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts. I'd love to hear everyone's comments and thoughts. So we've got 2 microphones here. We can pass them around. We are recording. So where do we go from here? That's the big question. So we know we have a number of solutions on the horizon. There's a fair amount of controversy regarding just how severe our problem or predicament is. Is it a problem or is it a predicament? According to Professor Guy McPherson, he says a definition of a predicament is something for which there is no solution. So to what extent are solutions possible, practical, viable? Theoretically, definitely possible, as we've seen. Practically, with the loss of Arctic sea ice, the acidification of the ocean, and other multiple tipping points that we've been crossing, how much time do we have left, and what is practically achievable in that time window? So this is open for everyone. Feel free to grab the mic if you'd like, particularly if you'd like it to be recorded, but that's not a requirement. So, yes, please, please.
Stand?
Sure, you can stand, you can grab the mic, you can take it out of that thing if you want, that way we can pass it around more easily, however you wish.
Okay, got it. During the first couple of meetings, I kind of got the impression that we were going to form some kind of an activist group. Now I'm hearing that we're going to go on a hiatus of 3 months and then do something else.
Yeah.
Are we intending to form any kind of a group that might actually want to accomplish something, or is that not true?
I would like to form such a group. What I am doing, what my partner Queen Melianor, my queen, and I are doing this summer is we're actually going on tour. We were going to have a series of presentations every month for June, July, and August, but we decided not to do that, partly, frankly, because of lack of interest, right, on the part of the community. You've been awesome, and many of the folks here have been absolutely wonderful in participating. Gerd drove for 5 hours to be here. My partner, Queen Melianor, flew all the way from Seattle. People have come from traveled long distances to be here. But what I was really hoping for is that much more of the community would come together, and including media and different groups represented. So rather than doing a summer series here, we're actually going on tour. And when I say tour, I'll be wearing my Darth Vader costume, going to different cities throughout the... I'm not kidding. And I've got a huge sign that has a big image of the Death Star on it that says abrupt climate change, and the Death Star is shooting its characteristic laser beam, at this case at Mother Earth, and destroying Mother Earth. And I have a whole public singing and performance routine to wake up the public. So that's how we're going to be spending our summer, is on this abrupt climate change tour. Now, having said that,
activism.
Pardon me?
Performance activism.
Performance activism, exactly. At the same time, we also have a weekly series that we, based on radish.org, where it's open to the public, and we get together and we have weekly video conferences on Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific time. So for a 3-hour period, we grapple with all these issues. So that's the closest thing to a group. It's an online group. I've been very hopeful that we can have a larger in-person community forming, but that simply hasn't quite taken root yet. And so when I look at the balance between, cost benefit, not financial cost, but cost in terms of time, this is the direction that we're going personally. But we absolutely need groups to form all around the country and all around the world so that we can implement the solutions that Professor Jacobson has been pushing for many years. So I see that the solutions are out there, the knowledge is out there, but where is the will, and how do we translate that will to mass adoption, a mass movement, political movements, etc.?
Yeah, I I sort of agree with that, but that's the hard part. And as far as Professor Jacobson, was it?
Jacobson, yes.
Versus Guy McPherson, I don't see that it matters a whole lot what we want to do. The consequence will be dire regardless of which one is right or whether it's somewhere in the middle. And I think we have to do as much as we possibly can to change the way human activity occurs.
So how do we do that?
How do we do that? That's my question.
Sure.
I just quit my job, and I was a I've actually been doing great work. I've been working with preschoolers and teaching them art and about Haida culture, and Haida are Native American people from Alaska. I've been teaching them Haida language, songs, stories, art, and as well as taking care of Mother Earth. And I've been doing that for 3 years, but I actually quit my job so I could join Jamin on the road, so that's the way I'm doing it. So maybe some of you will do the same thing. You know, so I hope to inspire you and other people who are listening to get active, because we are out of time.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll pass around the microphone. Oops. If you want. It's optional. Okay.
Guess I won't do the mic.
Right.
And I feel a real kinship there because I used to work with little kids and 3 different Native tribes and stuff. But now that we've moved back to Berkeley, I'm really inspired by tonight's metrics and data on there. And when we moved back, we put solar all over and went all electric. And so we charged the car from the roof, and we charged the stove from the roof and stuff. And I'm probably getting more micro rather than macro in thinking that if we can do our own lifestyle, and we're trying to talk to neighbors, so we've got a couple that are convinced and are putting solar on there, and our neighborhood group, that if we can get much cleaner as our little pact of, I don't know, 20 houses or something, and band together for any of the earthquake preparedness and all of that. If we live as a more micro, self-sustaining group and are in spirit, and then also spread that in everybody that we're talking to, it just, I don't know, it gives me more hope than thinking, oh my gosh, I have to join all these organizations and I can't do enough and I'm not very valuable to them. I just kind of feel leached out and don't know where to go, and then I feel less hopeful. So, and I'm also doing less when I feel less hopeful. So that's kind of where I'm at tonight.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for all of your involvement, Jamin, and tonight's presentation a lot.
Hey, that's really loud. My name is Armando Davila. I campaigned with my mother in Berkeley to get her elected to the Berkeley City Council. And we have a resolution. We've been dreaming up this resolution that would declare a climate emergency and would urge all the Bay Area mayors who signed on to the Paris Agreement to also consider that we're in an emergency situation and to come together for a regional just transition and emergency mobilization, under the hope that more coordination and somehow dealing with the regional transportation problem, and we could catalyze something that was pretty serious. So the item is coming before Berkeley City Council on June 12th. So, which is cool. It's cool, but Berkeley now has far less skin in the game as far as what it is willing to commit to. So if anyone's free on June 12th to go to a Tuesday night Berkeley City Council meeting and advocate, that's one thing. And or to pressure any of the Berkeley City Council members up until then, or just talk to them about your views on climate, that's another thing. And then if you know any elected officials in the Bay Area who might be braver than the mayor of Berkeley, who could advocate, push harder. We're trying to get as many declarations passed in the Bay Area as possible to kind of build momentum, kind of like a tipping point where we could commit to a more aggressive action. So that's one thing that's cooking up right now. The mayor of El Cerritos may be on board, a couple Richmond City Council people, Oakland is notified, but it needs much more of a coalition. So that is a direct ask of all of you, and there's definitely like multiple views around the timeline and the crisis, how it'll unfold. Like I was here for Guy McPherson's talk, and that was like really urgent. And I was like, okay, what's our extinction plan? It's like power down those nukes. But and your presentation was on the 2050 timeline, and so my understanding is that like the United States, in both its kind of more progressive liberal city, or rather the United States as a whole has been like seriously, this is probably not the right term, I want to say cock-blocking aggressive climate leadership, but even, you know, I was just personally a little disheartened that the mayor wouldn't like go out on the limb and being like, yo, this is an emergency, we're going to lead like it's one. Because one thing we wanted to do is make like the climate action plan in shorter doses, like what's our plan in 3 months? You know, is it participatory? Can the whole community, are the citizens now responsible, or is it just the 2 sustainability staff members? And trying to like flip the thinking on how we're approaching the problem. But again, it's like the social, political, it's like, okay, where are we gonna get all the money? Like, what are the details? And so people, you know, they want the like yellow brick road before they're willing to commit on the journey. And so this kind of like cart before the horse, or horse before the cart kind of scenario. It's like what's required, what people are brave enough to champion. And that's just, so anyway, that's some information, but we need some strong voices saying, hey, stick your neck out a little bit, be a little bit braver so that we can try and pull something off that actually meets our problem. And so, you know, we have a tricky scenario where like, do we accept the mayor's edits and get his support? Or do we push the mayor? And if we push the mayor, we need a solid coalition behind us. So that's an open project for the Bay Area going warp speed.
Can I ask you a question on that? So first, thank you. That was really articulate.
Feel free to grab the mic again. Not mandatory.
Do you think there's like a social justice versus renewable energy kind of tension going on? I've sort of detected that in Berkeley. That, you know, you have to sort of pry a little bit. It turns out a lot of people think that solar is for kind of the rich people that own houses and stuff like that. And we have this gigantic homeless problem and all this kind of stuff. So I'm just wondering what you know, since maybe you and your mom are sort of aware of city council priorities. Where does social justice come in? Is that kind of pushing away sort of the renewable energy WWS goals?
I'll give you my personal opinion, just my own personal opinion. Berkeley is like a city, this is going to be a larger critique, okay? So in my opinion, I feel like Berkeley is willing to do the progressive thing as far as it aligns with a certain kind of liberal identity structure of like who we are and what we're about. But the second it infringes on people's privileges, or for example, you know, it's a very class divided city. So, you know, priorly the city was passing laws that criminalized homelessness because some of the like more conservative council people have been pushing this, some of the more conservative Berkeley residents were pushing this. So it's not so much that there's a social justice environment tension, it's more of like a racial class tension. And like Berkeley isn't a city which has decided that it's going to comprehensively care for everyone. It's decided that it will be progressive as long as it doesn't infringe on people who would be bothered by, you know, taking care of everyone, if that makes sense. I don't know if I could say it more explicitly, but it's a very pretentious city, and which sucks because there's no like real leadership on, you know, it's kind of like the Democrats versus the Greens in a way, to kind of oversimplify it. So, you know, in the larger environmental justice organizing that's going on, there is a tension between putting vulnerable communities first and getting poor people jobs, and expending the budget to hire more police. You know, so that's like a classist thing. That's like a racist thing, actually. But the idea isn't to care for everyone, it's to hold these like class lines and do good as long as it doesn't threaten anyone's sense of entitlement kind of scenario. So that's how I see it.
Why was Mayor Aragon timid?
Aragon is timid because Aragon, I mean, I probably shouldn't be saying this publicly, but he's generally pretty timid. It's as soon as something comes, like, it's kind of serious. he kind of shies away. And I think unfortunately the sustainability officer was also kind of, you know, a majority of the labor would come down on him because he's responsible for implementing it. And so a lot of the sustainability staff in all the cities are overwhelmed because they don't have enough of the budget. You know, they need more staff. And that's where things get political, right? It's like policing takes a huge amount of the budget. But, you know, I was a little bit bummed by him because there wasn't no willingness to think, like, unorthodoxly. Like, I think the idea that we're going to address climate change by having 2 sustainability staff people, like, handle the whole city's transition, I think is a completely ridiculous idea myself. And I don't know why we're even thinking about it that way. But that's where we're at, basically. I don't know, I hope that answers your question.
Wanted to add something to your remarks about social justice and environmental justice. All renewable energy systems are replacing something. So the question is whether a renewable energy system provides more social justice opportunities, more environmental justice opportunities than what it replaces, and there have been a number of studies on that recently, and the answer, as you might suspect, is that they do, both in terms of the types of jobs that they provide, where the jobs are provided on the social justice side, what the actual income benefits are to changes in energy expenditures to households. All of these tend to slightly favor disadvantaged groups. And then on the environmental justice side, the benefits of reducing air pollution, reducing climate change damages tend to be disproportionately in favor of lower income people who are exposed to typically more air pollution or to more of the threats of climate change. So that's the way I think always to spin that. This question of is it just for rich people? It's no. It's a different way of getting energy and action to do the comparative analysis. It has social justice and environmental justice benefits.
But one like tension is, for example, do you clean, like in Oakland, it's do you clean up the air quality in Oakland? Or do you do these more like market-based solutions like EV installations? You know, so like the sustainability staff will put forth this whole plan, but the air is still dirty in Oakland. You know, so it's like who gets prioritized, what's getting prioritized, and why? Who's like coming to the table to design these climate solutions? Who's being left out? And based on who's being left out, what needs are not being addressed? So I mean, there's definitely just like the same kind of like racial class lines that have been dividing America forever are dividing America, you know, the local solutions, you could say.
Of course, they did clean up, I mean, the diesel trucks don't idle so much in the Port of Oakland, so that's a huge benefit to the local air around there where kids on the floor were breathing heavy doses of particulates all the time because of that. So there's some win-wins.
But who did that? Who made the change for that?
Well, I don't know who organized it.
Well, who initiated that changing over? It may have been a commercial need for.
California areas.
Oh.
In the Bay Area Air Quality District. So those are totally independent.
Oh.
That's a serious community organizing too.
Yeah.
It seems like we just have a speed and scale problem. You know, we know what if they're not solutions, they're certainly the best directions we could possibly go. So, how do we increase this speed and make sure that it's done on a worldwide scale? Because that's where the problem is. It seems like that's the only question. And it seems the main thing holding it back, well, is economics. Like everything has to pay for itself in a short time, or you know, it's like if you're looking at it makes complete economic sense, but maybe not today. I mean, maybe not. You know, to get it done tomorrow. You know, like it has to have that kind of urgency on a worldwide scale. So I think looking at it, what does it take to speed this thing along? You know, and it is moving really well. Like you know, in China they're making so many solar panels and wind turbines, and they're really moving towards that quickly. And you know, as we know, this country's not a leader in as much as we could be in that. But you know, we know the direction. I think forming the question is, how do we get there as fast as possible? You know, understanding what the climate risks are and the risks of the biosphere, and maybe tipping points that we don't know about. You know, You know, I think understanding that, formulating the right question is the first step to finding a solution.
I suppose I'll take the mic since it's right here. So I'd want to sort of spin that, but also try to, you know, specify a very narrowly defined problem, taking it from a very broad problem to something that can be implemented in a measurable way, and that's simply renewables. The conversation under discussion tonight, I was very impressed by the statistic showing what percentage of the world's population believes that we should go 100% renewable. It sounds like, you know, the citizens of the world are very bullish on renewables, much more so than, you know, this apocalyptic problem of climate change. However, you know, real it is. So when we talk about, you know, how do we get from here to there in an accelerated manner, I also wonder, you know, what are the brakes that are already being applied that, you know, that we can you know, let off on. You know, there's certain vested interests, there's entrenched ways of doing things. What are the main inhibitors of moving, you know, even faster to renewables, given that we have, you know, so much global positive interest in it?
I don't need the mic. I think that's my question was, I'm concerned there's this wonderful 100% renewable program, but what I'm worried about is that we're running out of time, because the Arctic is about to the Arctic is going to be ice-free possibly as soon as this September, or maybe within 1 or 2 years, and then after that the jet stream breaks up. It's already breaking up, and there are all sorts of problems that are coming up, and so what I think is that we need to buy time in order to implement this program of Professor Jacobson's. And then, of course, if the ice disappears from the Arctic, there's 1,400 gigatons of methane, and the methane can come up, and that'll accelerate climate change. And we get into catastrophic warming and abrupt climate change. And so my question was for the Sierra Club. Generally, up to now, there have been negative connotations with geoengineering, but at this point, at this juncture, is the Sierra Club willing to get behind and lobby for safe methods of geoengineering just to buy civilization time in order to implement a program to get to zero carbon emissions?
Yeah.
Thank you. Good.
Getting back to activism.
Do you have any answers to these questions? Like, are there any
I was asking
questions that have some more.
Oh, I have some answers.
I think it would be good if once the question's asked, just in my opinion, if people can give an answer if somebody had some information.
Yeah.
Yeah. For example.
Question, and then just move on to the next question.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'll unless you wanted to address that, ma'am.
No.
Okay.
No.
So I'm really glad you did bring up the Arctic sea ice. It's the U.S. Naval Postgraduate College in 2009 published a paper that they had compiled, I think, in 2007, predicting that we would have an ice-free Arctic in 2016 plus or minus 3 years. So we could have an ice-free Arctic this summer, we could have an ice-free Arctic next summer. Take away all Arctic sea ice in the summer, you lose that reflectivity, a spike in heating. The heating of global warming generally is concentrated at the poles, particularly the North Pole, since we're running out of Arctic sea ice. And so with all this warm water in the pole, you know, screws up the jet stream, the Gulf Stream, and it's predicted, but not proven, that would result in catastrophic loss in agricultural capacity because of the heating, which likewise is concentrated in the interior of continents in North America, which is where the great grain-producing regions are. So in the face of all this uncertainty, part of the reason that I brought in Professor Guy McPherson was to kind of force the issue. And, you know, let's bring kind of, you know, Dr. Doom to the table, and what do you got, right? And he of course has a very compelling presentation, the bottom line thesis of which is we're basically out of time. So building off of that, I said, okay, what can we do to refreeze the Arctic, right? To turn it around. And I'm in favor, I can't speak for the Sierra Club, but I am in favor of a local geoshading, putting up literally millions of square kilometers of reflective material of one form or another to reflect away the sunlight that's beating down on the now dark blue Arctic Ocean water, which is absorbing heat, absorbing sunlight that used to be reflected away by the ice that used to be there. Combined with other mechanisms, whether it's ocean barriers to prevent the warm ocean currents from eating away what little ice is left, etc. Yes, it's controversial, but we have to face the fact that we do not have a crystal ball. Professor Guy McPherson has put together a sort of a grand synthesis based on, at last count, I think 67 self-reinforcing feedback loops that all push us in the direction of catastrophic overheating and accelerated mass extinction. So I am in favor of really pushing for some of these geoengineering solutions that would precisely buy us some time. Yeah.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So there's one solution called marine cloud brightening.
Yeah.
Which is that's the one that I personally think has the greatest chance of success of holding off the heating until civilization has time to implement 100% renewable energy everywhere. And so the question is would the Sierra Club be willing to get behind that and lobby Congress for that? And should we be advocating for that? It's very clever. You seed the clouds with salt crystals, and you get an amplification of 10 million. The energy to create a salt crystal is amplified by 10 million when you consider the lifetime of the droplet in the cloud and how much light heat it reflects. And so that's the kind of amplification factor that we need to solve this sort of problem. And it may be the only way to refreeze the Arctic.
What would it cost? Would we have to get buy-in from Congress or something? Or?
So it's very inexpensive. You need 1,500 300-ton ships, and so you have to create a mist of seawater particles, 1 micron in size, and so you need to convert 40 meters squared per second of water into this mist, and that's very technologically feasible. And so the cost to build the hardware is probably under $5 billion.
For the entire Arctic?
For these ships, and so these ships cool the entire planet.
So what kind of
counter argument to that? You're open to a.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think that the only kind of geoengineering I'd approve of is carbon sucking from the atmosphere, because it directly removes the carbon, and those are kind of primitive, you know, and I've heard of $500 a ton, there's a possibility and so on, and they have to scale up. But if other than those, I would say don't do it, because I'm way off the spectrum from McPherson. I don't think we're all going to be dead in 10 years. We're going to have deep trouble no matter what we do, but there's such moral hazard in having these effective, you know, fake it until we make it kind of thing, because the carbon is still being emitted. We no longer care because the Arctic is in better shape, we don't have the jet stream wavering, and so what we really need to address the climate problem is several billion people activists. And if they have a reason to fade back and say, oh, I've got to handle the Arctic's okay now, then there goes the motivation and the willpower, and that means we're hosed. So I would say the only kind of geoengineering to go for, because we're not at the desperate stage of McPherson land, is the kind that can actually bring CO2 out of the atmosphere directly.
Well, that's part of the debate, because I'm a lot closer to McPherson, actually. I think we are in a crisis right now, even though it doesn't, maybe we look outside, it doesn't appear to be that way.
A crisis, yes, but he says every single person will be dead in 10 years.
Well, I don't know about that. So I'm not saying
Right.
I agree totally, but I think we're in a crisis close to what he's predicting, because there's a lot of methane, and there's controversy on all of this. But there's a precautionary principle. If you run the risk, if you run the risk of something really catastrophic happening, then whether you take action or not depends on the probability of that happening and how much damage it does. And if there's a risk of losing the whole planet, that's a pretty high risk.
Yes, and I agree. We don't know about those tipping points. So, I'm just trying to present the other side of the argument is that the technological solutions, I think Professor Jacobson said, we can do these things, and yet we're not. And so,
but we're running out of time. We need to do.
But your initiative also takes a lot of effort and a lot of money and people to get behind and develop these things. So why not go for the long-term solution? I think that's what he's saying.
We need to do both. Obviously, you don't abandon.
Is underneath all of these, potential solutions and technologies and problems.
What if we did both? What if we saved things until it caught on?
That's the whole point.
And
yes.
What is the jurisdictional thing about saving it until it catches on? Could Elon Musk save us with whatever technology, and then we do this grassroots and maybe through Congress and maybe through commercial enterprises that show the, what if we just did it all simultaneously? And I don't know what the jurisdictions are. What if somebody came up with all the funding, who's the Virgin Airlines guy? Richard, whatever.
Branson.
And so what if we had the funding to do the thing with the
marine cloud, right?
Yeah, clouds and brightness. And
I wanted to comment on geoengineering and technical solutions like that. I've spent my career developing new technologies and technologies at scale. And there's always surprises, and I get very concerned if you're talking about scaling something like that up very, very quickly. Because it's going to when you learn about the problems with it, when you learn them on scale, they really come home to it. And we've got many examples of that. We're going to get fast-growing railroad ties. So we've got eucalyptus trees in. And we've got other things that we've done that have created bigger problems than we are. So I'm much more very conservative when it comes to introducing new technology at scale. We need to work on them. We need to develop them. We need to do it systematically. And it does not work to do them in a hurry because I think that it just increases the chances of a major, major problem. And people love to put their hopes in technology because it's easier to have a technology solve a problem than to go back and change fundamentals of lifestyle. That's right. So I agree with you on that.
I want to add into what you said in perhaps a little different way. I was here at the last event and at this event as well, and the messages in both those events are critically, amazingly important to the future of the planet. And the question that hit me in the eyes, square in the forehead last time, and I didn't ask it, and so I'm asking it now, is how is it that we have this group of 20 to 30 or 40 or 50 people talking about this situation that has to do with the survival of life on Earth here, and it's not out there in the public sphere. And it seems to me that I would like to address that question. I've studied it some. I know about, for example, the Yale School of Climate Change Communication work on why it is that the human psyche, even scientists can block out reality when it comes to things like this. But that's where the issue is. And yourself to who you are. Of course. Okay. That's where the issue is in terms of what needs to get done. We need to get that message out there, and then we need to help figure out what it takes to get people to accept that message. And it's not a small problem. I mean, people, intellectuals talk about it all the time. But okay, so that I'm Dwight Collins. I teach one of the founding faculty members of Presidio Graduate School in San Francisco, and it offers an MBA in sustainable management, which integrates environmental sustainability and social justice throughout the MBA. We've been very successful. We have 2,000 graduates, and our graduates are proving that companies can be profitable and sustainable socially and environmentally simultaneously. So.
Just to add to that, I mean, we have this kind of on the new mythology, sort of line of thought. you know, we have this wonderful sort of mise en scène of elements that are, you know, we've got these, you know, increasing, you know, hurricanes and forest fires. I mean, you know, we really have to just capture the moment, right? I mean, the story is unfolding before our eyes. And, you know, people are becoming, I mean, you go down to the Gulf states and just talk to anybody there about the reality of climate change, you'll probably, you know, find some inspiring stories. But the point is like, how do you harness that to create a unified voice and effort that actually, you know, touches every person on the planet? You know, and you know, that's it may be too ambitious to start, but the point is, how do you get it out of the 20, 30 people in this room to start, you know, to the city of Berkeley? You know, and you know, the mayor, you know, and you're starting to affect policy at municipal level, policy at the state level. I mean, California is doing a great job in general. You know, kind of keeping us in with the climate accord and, you know, sort of the global effort on this thing. But you know, we simply need to create momentum behind the successes that we're having, but connect all of those stories together in a way that, frankly, the mass media can't ignore anymore. And part of the problem is that the major channels of information are all owned and controlled by the same boards of directors that own the petroleum industry, you know, but by and large. I mean, that really is a fundamental problem. And, you know, that's a hard thing to change. You know, I mean, look where we are today on the federal, you know, sort of government. But somehow we do need to change it at the same time.
I'm wondering if you could comment on this a little bit, because I got to speak to you a little bit myself, but you have so much valuable information.
Thank you, yes. Late incoming.
Well, first of all, it's so nice to see so many people together with such different backgrounds and really trying to find a solution. And I was hearing, for example, that you teach sustainability, and so in the past years I've been involved also in teaching sustainability in an integrated program in which we would have, so for example, professors from different universities across the globe, and we would have a course with different case studies that students would work together. So we would have, for example, one professor in Asia, somebody in Arizona here, somebody in Brazil, and in different parts, and trying to find a solution to individual problems and bringing people from different parts of the world to solve the problem, right? But the question really is, so how do we move forward and implement it? And as an academic, what I keep thinking the whole time is really how to move forward. And when we think about it in theory, we find all these solutions and everything, but how do we do it? And it seems like we need to act at many different scales, right? So we need to do our individual actions in our communities and act at all the different scales, but how do we get everybody together and get the voice out there? That's the challenge.
You know, I think there may be kind of natural systems that are sort of in play even beyond sort of, you know, human capability. I mean, I think, for example, younger generations, the millennial generation. I mean, I have two sons, and you know, one of them is at University of Santa Cruz, an environmental sciences program. My 16-year-old just wrote his paper in his English class about, you know, climate change. You know, and I mean, I ran into a young Asian, you know, gentleman who had just graduated from with a PhD from Stanford, and he spent the last 2 years just traveling around the world rather than going into the job market because he really wanted to understand where we are. You know, what's going on the planet. And so I think part of the solution may be creeping up just from our kids, frankly, you know, because they're not buying in to everything that our generation bought into. You know, they don't really believe in, you know, this. It's quite obvious to most, you know, younger people that this system of the economic system that we have is not working. It's unsustainable. You can't afford $1 million 3+2 starter house. You know, it's not a life that they're choosing to live. So, you know, I think somehow tapping the energy of the millennial generation, the youth, is part of the key to having this thing sort of catch on at scale.
On the other
hand, there you go.
May I respond to that? I know you can't all see me. I'm Samantha. I think you're on to something with the younger generation having the solutions, and I'm still sitting with your question, why isn't this in the public discourse? And I'm personally curious about I'm also curious about what it takes to keep in our sights a really coherent process of solutionary thinking and engagement. And I want to throw out that I've been working a lot lately with the meme, what the fuck? And with talking to people about the very core and seed of our experience of what is alienating that we do our best to ignore. I'm a transformational expert. I've been working with people in very deep spaces around what causes our connection and our dissociation since I was 13. I started grabbing kids and creating experiments about why we feel like we belong and why we don't. And economically speaking, I think we need to really look at collaborative models. I work with a project called Savannah that's a post-blockchain. It's looking like a post-blockchain framework for large collaborative processes. And I really hear what you're saying about it's possible to be sustainable and profitable, and yet the profit motive, I think, is part of what keeps us from turning towards solutions. So I'm putting energy, because profit is always zero sum, so it incents the wrong behaviors. So I've been really looking at putting energy into how do we transition what we're scaling into collaborative models for economic models, and transition funding. And the green energy sector, the renewable energy sector, is one of the key sectors where we could start doing that. And so I want to really invite us to look at where could we work with cities and with jurisdictions that can, create policy and programs to do that within collaborative models, because it's very win-win. It's also very stable. It's anti-fragile, and that we desperately need that right now. We desperately need to prove economically that we're stronger together than we are apart, because at the core, everyone's working to make more money because people are alienated. That's why we have Trump, is because we have enough alienation going on in our country that we've managed to create our own worst monster. So those of us in the leadership community need to really go into what are the core strategies through which we could change incentive for engagement. And that's why I'm talking about what the fuck, because I think everyone has one inside of them that if we can agree on that, we can get somewhere. If we can agree that everyone has this little itchy niggling, I don't belong here, I don't fit in, I've got to compete in order to survive or succeed, then we're going to get somewhere.
Yeah, really outstanding points. I think you're, and a couple other folks have really gotten to the heart of the issue, one of the hearts of the issue, which is our current modality of life on planet Earth, which is a superset which includes the current mode of production, which Michael and I summarize as the economy of hoarding, right? The current story for humanity, if I were to sum it up from my perspective, is the more you hoard for yourself, the better off you'll be. Just hoard, just hoard, just hoard, and somehow you'll survive the storm, right? The bottleneck. And it couldn't be more false. Now, couple that with the premise that a gentleman, a friend of mine, Adam, who was at the last dinner, who's been working for years on his central thesis, which is that money is a poison. It's an addictive substance, but that also poisons us, right? And so hoarding becomes an addiction like alcohol, like any other addictive substance. And I've experienced this myself, both in my own life and also observing colleagues. I worked at Microsoft for a number of years. I was corporate strategy manager, and so I worked directly with Bill Gates. And I call out Bill Gates publicly because I really take issue with his stance with respect to all of this. and I've confronted him personally on it. And I literally refer to him as the biggest heroin addict on earth. His particular flavor of heroin is money. And I think it really blinds us. And the fact that most governments in the world, including the US government, are controlled by the oligarchy. And the oligarchs basically care about one thing, increasing their wealth. No matter how many billions or tens of billions you have, you always want more. That's one of the characteristics of this disease. So because of that, my colleague Michael and I have developed a new standard for a global economy and a new mode of production called a compassionate economy, an economy of sharing, along with a new standard called CCC, which stands for Certified Compassionate Companies. And the idea of the model is that certified compassionate companies donate 100% of their profits initially to ending world hunger, so that we can unite humanity and create a floor through which below which no one will fall. And the idea is that this movement, that these community cafes, which we've pioneered in Southern California for ending hunger community by community, becomes so popular, and that the story that we're finally ending hunger becomes so popular and so magnetic that these brands, led by Sato Hemp, a Japanese fashion house that makes hemp clothing, which is sustainable in itself, become preferred massively by consumers. So we elbow out the hoarding companies and promote the sustainable companies, and this whole new modality of production that we're in business not to hoard more money for ourselves, but to end hunger. And then once we've ended hunger, surplus profits can go to Professor Mark Jacobson and his projects, right? And so, so there's lots of angles to approach this, but I think I think we've got to focus on these hearts of the problem and not just say, oh, what's it going to take? What's it going to... Well, look, we've got to address the cancer. If we don't extirpate the cancer, it's just going to keep growing. Another cancer is human population. Part of the hoarding, it's not just hoarding money, it's hoarding children, right? Oh, I've got all these children who are going to carry on my legacy and my DNA and my family name, or my family business, whatever the case may be. You see it all over the place, right? And we've added 1 billion people in the last 13 years. And we added 1 billion in the 13 years preceding that. This is absolutely crazy. We're in this burnout phase of life on Earth. So I think it's going to take some radical transformations of a revolutionary nature, not violent revolution, but revolution. So love to hear more thoughts on that from everyone. Yes, ma'am.
Well, speaking of that, Rabbi Michael Lerner lives right here in Berkeley. He heads Network of Spiritual Progressives, and he has the Global Marshall Plan in mind. And one of the congressmen, the Muslim congressman, I can't think of his name, he proposed it to Congress, and it's one of the bills before Congress, ending hunger and poverty in the world. And so I agree with all that you said. We have to change the whole paradigm. I also just wanted to mention that besides the very young getting involved, the very old can too, because I'm a member of Elders Climate Action, and we want to preserve the planet for the younger generations. There's the Bay Area Elders Climate Action. It's also national, but we have a monthly virtual meeting, so you can look up the website and engage in our actions, which are mostly attending meetings like Fossil Free California here in Berkeley. I went to one of those, and there's a bill now, SB 900 something, about getting STRS and PERS, the biggest retirement pension groups, to divest from investing in fossil fuel companies. And they're telling them that they could lose money if they invest in them, because the economy is getting involved in the problems of climate change too, because fossil fuel companies are going to lose money, and so they're approaching it from the economic angle too. So that we go to meetings about clean air, and we write a lot of letters to representatives. So that's just one little organization. We work with 350.org too.
I think that's really great what you're doing. I don't know your name. I'm talking to you. It's really amazing. And I think a lot of times elders are targets of people getting their money and putting it, you know, by trickery into weird things. I had something to say and I totally lost it. So if I remember, I'll come back.
Give it to that fellow.
Well, as far as changing the narrative, you know, getting this information out in the world, we have this incredible global media, mass media system, and as we all know, it's dominated by the consumer culture drivers. But it's, I see a lot of promise in the combination of growing networks using online systems and communities. Samantha mentioned the Savannah Project, which is one of many initiatives going on to link up people in groups, the kind of meta-network concept, creating networks of networks, and I think there's a lot going on. But the bottom line is, how do we, in a media culture that makes rock stars out of technologists, why can't the Professor Jacobsons start getting this kind of notoriety? And you know, we have had obviously a few well-known leaders in the green space, but we have the vast ranks of scientists who are and various kinds of researchers who are assimilating all of this data and are really facilitating this dire need for collective intelligence. And it just seems to me that I think there's some opportunities, you know, with Netflix sitting with some hundreds of millions of dollars of production money in the bank waiting to churn out new series. We've got to get some billions. Yeah, it's just insane, you know. And this global appetite for this programming is astounding. But when you see the backdrop of the events that are happening on an annual basis, the fires, the floods, everything going on, we could begin to lay out this narrative of what's actually happening and get the real experts to stand up. And your incredible presentation, the synthesis of data and thinking that goes into that, is a pinnacle, you know, and that needs to be translated into more, you know, generally understandable infographics, simplified kinds of summaries of that information. But you and those who share your level of expertise in these specialized areas need to be elevated and celebrated by our culture. You know, and I really think we need to, you know, create some initiatives spanning these networks. I mean, we have truly a global network, as the statistics say. People want, that's just one measure right there of the people who want to convert to renewable energy, the huge percentage of the global population. Well, it's amazing how in many other fields there's this collective intelligence out there. It just needs to be recognized. And so, you know, Radish is a venture, and I'm delighted to be working myself with Jamin on that. But I think it indicates the direction that we're seeing. And maybe right out of this group, I know several people that produce shows. Let's get, maybe start sketching out some proposals, you know. So.
So I also think that, like, as individuals, we can affect change through what we do. I'm a visual artist, and I consider myself an activist as well. So I've just decided recently, because education is so important, that I'm actually going to do this guerrilla art project in Seattle and the whole of Washington State, if I can get around it. And I'm going to actually create artistically designed biodegradable signs that talk about things like using Roundup, what that does to the environment, or any of these issues that people are just doing locally that are destroying habitat, polluting, or just to raise the awareness. So that's going to be my campaign that I'm going to do. I'm going to bring in local artist friends to help design these and things. So I think just even little initiatives like that can make a huge impact, and we might not think that they're big, but they can become very big.
They can be, but you know what it is the kind of data, the kind of presentation that we saw tonight is what can stimulate thousands of local initiatives like that.
Absolutely.
People have to get the big picture and understand what's going on, then they're motivated. But in our current media climate of science denying, you know, we've got to break through that. We've got to turn that completely 180 degrees.
Yeah.
And,
I agree.
I've jokingly said many times, if we can just get Miley Cyrus on our side, we'll rock it, you know. So.
Well, let's get Dave Matthews on board.
So one narrative changing, like very targeted shift that does need to occur is with the elected officials in the state of California and municipalities. Because right now, you know, the city of Berkeley will declare a climate emergency, but it won't commit to like trying a decade transition. You know, it won't commit to changing business as usual as far as implementing climate action plans. You know, so I'm a millennial. You know, I'm working on changing the narrative, and if you all walk out of here and you don't at least send a fucking email to the mayor of Berkeley or any other elected officials, I will be so fucking pissed at you. I will seriously be so pissed at you. Like, the vision of what we're talking about is the entire Bay Area getting together and aggressively coordinating with collective intelligence to pull off an appropriate scale and speed of transition. This resolution is just phase one of admitting we have a problem and admitting that all these climate mayors who are failing to meet their own city's climate action goals need to fucking do something about that. You know, and like, the problem is social, political, and capital. You know, people are like, we're overwhelmed, you know, I want to be the personality who's at the front, and if I'm not the first person to do it, then whatever. Or because my mom supports Palestine, she gets pigeonholed because the other people are fucking Zionists. You know, the shit is like real, and people are dying. You know, individual actions are great, but as long as you're fucking doing something, you know? But don't think that your individual action alone, understood as a personal action, is enough, because I think we're definitely past that point. Personal action as a transition, you know, into like more participatory action as teams at least. But I can definitely shoot an email, like give you his email, but we, you know, an op-ed, like, cause seriously, everyone, you know, people are asleep. The city of Berkeley is asleep. You know, the leaders of the west of the country are still asleep. You know, we can talk about climate denial, but we the progressive cities, the coastal elites, are still fucking asleep at the wheel. Like, we can't pretend that we're doing enough and that it's, I mean, we're not pretending that, but you know, that is kind of the pretense that it's really fucking frustrating. So yeah, I mean, your Presidio crew, all your students, I mean, y'all have hell of capital, y'all have hell of teams. Like, the Bay Area Just Transition Emergency Mobilization is a vision that is like a seed right now. And then a lot of organizing is going, for better or for worse, into the Global Climate Action Summit happening in September. So I was just at a meeting this Tuesday with like 200 people who are gonna be prepping for this march, and those like synced talking points like really needs to happen. Like, we need like a very solid integrated set of demands that conservative style is the only thing we're ever fucking talking about. Like, that shit really does need to happen, because otherwise we're gonna get our ass kicked, you know, by apathy, ADHD on a collective scale, and you know, whatever.
I wanted to ask you real quick, do you know about the various mayor meetings? The cities meet annually, and
there's like various regional efforts, but I don't have the security clearance. I need that. So.
Well, the cities are really the centers of civilization, and it's really true that if the major cities networked on a whole new level, things could move quicker.
That's
They
really
transcend national governments.
Like, that's what this initiative is specifically trying to do, but because of politics and like will and like people's lack of imagination, it's like, they're going to send one initiative to the committee, which might take it fucking forever just to have the city of Berkeley say, it'll commit to being 100% renewable by 2020. And that's just city operations. That's not community-wide or embodied emissions and like how much we're consuming or anything like that. So like, we need to fucking like acupuncture this shit with some serious targeted messaging.
Sierra Club just did a mailing. I got one, maybe you all did too, about who to vote for to change Congress from climate deniers to, action-oriented people. Did everybody get that? You got it. It was a Sierra Club mailing, so we have to get the vote out.
That too.
On all levels, local and state and national.
I commend you on your effort as well. I did remember what I was thinking about. So you were speaking to hunger, and I'm in food, and I think about hunger and food and sustainability and how we plant, and one of the most important things I've learned in the last few years, because I've been delusional about it myself, I don't use plastics, and there's a lot of things I don't do, and I stand for raw food and like organics, and I'm all in that space. But the truth is that there's a world problem, right? And it's not, we can't even, if we can talk about solving hunger, but if there's not electricity, there's no clean water, and then there's no food. So it actually really does kind of come back to all the renewables and how do we get the electricity and how do we get energy into these places that don't have any, and how do we clean up the rest of it? Because when I was living in Bali, they burn the plastic, right? They just, what are you gonna do with it? So they burn it. So there's actual real problems that are related to not even having infrastructures in place, and I think that's where, getting behind projects like renewable energy and going to your city. I mean, you're talking about 2050, and we can't even pass something in Berkeley in 2020, which is one of the most progressive cities on the planet, allegedly, right? So I mean, this is.
Yeah, can't do it in Berkeley. Where are you going to?
Yeah, where are you going to get it done? It's like that's the whole.
Yeah, exactly.
Berkeley has money and incentive, and it's known as the progressive city. So if it's it's a real problem if you can't get it done.
There is a organization, the National League of Cities, which is in fact we're kind of doing a collaboration with them around kind of sustainable cities sort of a theme, but I think they represent a large percentage of cities with a population of over 25,000 or something like that. But the point is if you can get a sort of a leadership organization that has the mayors that are all listening and are sitting around the same table, and find a sort of a leader, whether it's Berkeley or whether it's San Francisco or wherever it is, but figure out how to create a policy at a municipal level that sort of speaks to all of the tentacles of this problem that can be addressed at a municipal level, and somehow. There just happens to be an organization which is an entry point to a large percentage of most of the large cities in our country. So, one approach may be, rather than just focusing on Berkeley, focus on the National League of Cities and focused on their agenda and focus on the policy, conversations that they're having, and find an advocate who's a respected kind of leader within that, organization, and sort of just pull this thing up to a conversation that's involving all the cities of a certain scale in the country. That might be tactically a sort of a better approach. Not that we shouldn't be all emailing the mayor of Berkeley tomorrow.
Or
we probably should.
Local mayor.
Or your local mayor, but But the point is how do you scale it? You know, and so, you know, just there are some organizations that have already put a lot of, you know, energy into, you know, creating these linkages, you know, where there is potentially a common unified message could be sort of distributed at scale. So.
Anyone who hasn't spoken so much yet on the pipe in?
Good question.
Yeah. Anyone who hasn't spoken who would like to pipe in, please. Yeah. Oh, sure. No, or make it
thinking here, because he was saying how to scale it, and sometimes I feel it's one hard point is that people want different things. And he just showed us that regardless of what people want, it's the same solution. It's better economically, it's better socially, it's better environmentally. So like some of the big corporations, or you were talking about people who just want more and more and more money,
yeah.
If they change into renewable energy or they solve these problems, they will get more and more what they want too in some ways.
Except for the automotive companies and except for the oil companies, right?
But if people switch into renewable energy, it's going to be good in all respects. So.
I just wanted to comment. I'm circulating a list, an email list, so that we can continue this conversation even after tonight, leveraging our collective intelligence. Because one of the things, as Michael Gosney pointed out, he's one of my colleagues in Radish, we're creating a platform for collective intelligence, is the assumption, the assertion that no one of us alone, you know, can figure out what we need to do, whether individually or as part of a collective. Well, which collective, right? And we start talking about geoshading, and then Doug says, well, no, that's going to be counterproductive, right? See, this needs to be hashed out. But instead of us each trying to hash it out within the confines of our own cranium, which is a pretty dangerous neighborhood to hang out in, we need to do it collectively.
Or in our own silo with all of our colleagues, speaking our own language.
Yeah, our own echo chamber, right, exactly. And so, you know, a few years back, Michael Call, Michael Gosney, some other Michaels, we seem to have an epidemic of Michaels within Radish, but we all, you know, came to the collective realization that we cannot do this under our current modality of existence, where each of us has a job, and each of us has our own thoughts, and each of us has our own Facebook page. We need to come together and form a hive, and use our collective, just like the bees are a great example. There's what is that, Honeybee Democracy? An outstanding book about the collective intelligence of bees. They can make brilliant decisions as a collective with, you know, hundreds of thousands of neurons compared to our, you know, billions or trillions or however many. But they're way smarter than your average human because we are shooting ourselves in the foot. We need to come together. So these meetings, these Sierra Club dinners, are a step in that direction. Radish, our platform, which we're about to launch publicly, and anyone will be able to join, are a step in that direction. So I just wanted to mention that. Very important.
I just want to take it back to the narrative side a little bit, because I think that's really crucial. And see, Jack Welch, probably all of you who know him hate him in some ways, but he was a really proficient CEO of GE for a couple of decades. And he said that when he wanted to put an initiative out, and he did many and many, many of these, that he'd get to the point where he'd vomit. He'd given it 5,000 times. He was so sick of it, he could hardly stand to do it. But he knew that he needed to do it to the point of vomit, or else he'd get the script right, and then he'd repeat it forever. And then, thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Mark was amazing.
Yeah, and his slides too.
He'd get it to the point where he was so sick of it, and then he knew he had a chance of it sticking. So he had to repeat it 5,000 times for it to stick. And so George Lakoff, who is a retired, I think he's a cognitive linguist or something, professor at Berkeley who retired, his thing is that you need to develop a framework, and that it takes decades, and the framework is a narrative that says your points and gets them across and so on, and you have to beat that drum forever, and it takes a long, long time. But once you've beaten it forever, then you can kind of trigger that narrative in the public a little bit. And he says that the conservatives were terrible just until about the 1960s, and then they sort of figured it out.
And they got really good at it.
They got really good at it, and they're winning the narrative contest terrifically. And so what's, I think, missing is somehow a collective narrative that we all can share, so that when you know, the news camera comes around to any one of us, and we don't say exactly the same thing, but we all have the same points that we get across, and you push them to the point where we're vomiting because we're so sick of them. And then at that point, they might start to take hold and make a difference.
I just have to pipe in on that one because I'm writing a book called Everyone Comes Home. And I think that that one pillar of this that is still compelling, that has been told by Joanna Macy and Barbara Marx Hubbard and many others, but it's worth retelling, is that this is our home. And that, you know, if you want to know what motivates human beings, look at what they fight wars over. We fight wars over land, food, power, and water.
And religion.
Power. Religion is usually an excuse on top of one of those other things. That is then the story that's told, but not the truth. So, historically, all we've been trying to do is come home. One way to read all the history is just to say all we've been doing is fighting over home. So, our greatest hope lies in ceasing to fight over home and doing something constructive about home, i.e. making it livable for everybody. So I just wanted to name that narrative because I think the, hey, it's time for us all to come home narrative is really compelling, and it's actually historically, it is the transcend and include moment on the thing we've been fighting over all these years at every octave of civilizational growth, the growth of our civilizations. We've been fighting over land, water. Native Americans killed each other for buffalo way before the Americans came in and killed them. This is not a new story, and it's not racial. So we have a great opportunity to come home.
Can't wait to read your book.
Yeah, me too. I think of the economy and ecology have the same root, and it's home. And there's been a big disconnect between the economy and the ecology. This is the whole problem. If humans concentrated on the home, let's say that, it seems to me the end goal would be the average effort of humanity to be restorative rather than consumptive, and that's a good goal to go with. And there's a lot of accounting in there and figuring out, well, what is restorative. But I think that joining those things together so that the economy is supportive of the ecology, which is true wealth, and true wealth creation would be increasing the vitality of the living planet. Those things are joinable, and there's good economic theory suggesting that. It's consistent with thermodynamics and consistent with biology that would lead to a restorative economy. And it's blockchain enabled. There's parts of that. There's other things around things.
Very little, but blockchain is, you could say that blockchain has leveraged the potential that we can get there because it's unmoored rigidity in the system.
It's open possibilities, yeah. There's a lot of people working on these ideas, but I think if the end goal is an increase of life of the living planet, having, half of our stuff is gone. Half the wild animals are gone in the last 30 years. Half the pollution has been created in the last 30 years.
And that's actually the harder question to really discuss, because it's really not just human population we're talking about. Right. Because really, 90% of this conversation has been contained in the human population. you know, a sustainable, you know, civilization. But really, the larger conversation is all of life, right?
That supports us.
Yeah. That creates an ecosystem that supports us over the long term.
Yeah.
But that is also, you know, respecting nature and all life that exists.
Well, that's why biologists are so depressed, because the systems are so complex they don't see a way out of it. And collapse of biological systems are not recoverable in their studies, right? So that means we have a very short amount of time to get to. But I do think that we're the only intelligent species, the only species that have a chance of doing that, of becoming restorative. But we've got the hands to do it and the minds to look ahead, the technology to talk to each other. We just have the economic system that supports bad behavior. Having an economic system that rewards good behavior makes total sense. Why does it make sense to blow up countries that put all this money into military? It's a lose-lose situation. How about a win-win situation? How about if the Navy restored the oceans? How about if the Coast Guard regrew the kelp forest? How about if the Army planted forests?
Exactly.
Right?
You know what I mean?
And what do you get?
Imagine if you could shift
you get wealthy.
investment and make it profitable to do good.
Right.
You know?
That's all it takes is an economic unit that rewards that service of planetary restoration.
All right, all the quiet elders. Quiet types. Let's go.
Regarding what we could do tonight, how about an email to the mayor of Berkeley from
Thank
this,
you.
from
Yes.
this who would you willing to write to you? You know, we could all sign. I mean, that has a lot of power with all the people who are here tonight and who have been talking.
Absolutely. So in the next 24 hours, I'll get an email out to everyone who signed up on the list. And Armando, if you would take a first crack at a draft or some bullet points, just to get us started.
Not that we necessarily just want to forward your words, but it might not be a bad idea for you to frame the argument, you know, because you're very close to it, and we could use that and put it in our own words.
You know, one thing that I'm not that good at framing is the climate reality, or just the necessity to go faster and be bold. Like someone who's like more rooted in that thing it'd be great if that person crafted.
I'll take that on.
Okay.
I'll take on that. Let's you and I collaborate.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, then share that with the group, and we'll all do it. You know, sounds good.
Good idea.
Thank you.
You could get a postcard writing thing going as well. Well, we did that in Seattle, and it was really effective.
And I think we're getting to the heart of something here, which is, I think that this group here, if we hung out for a few more hours, we could envision. Thank you so much. Thank you. Great stuff. If we hung out for a few more hours, I'm not suggesting we hang out till 3 a.m., but if we did, I think we could come up with a pretty compelling picture for utopia, right? You know, community cafes would be a part of it. Regenerative agriculture, right? That sequesters carbon and regenerates ecosystems, etc. But the life or death question is not so much what does that utopia look like? It's how do we get there from here? You know, given that we're stuck in this modality of survival, whether you're Bill Gates and you're freaking out because Jeff Bezos just passed you up.
Which is the big problem he's faced with, you know, being the second richest guy.
That's his crisis, being the second richest person on planet Earth. I'm not kidding, that is his crisis. I worked with the man. And so how do we get there from here? That's the key. And my fundamental thesis is it's going to take collective intelligence to figure that out. It's going to take my good friend Gerd, who's got so much inside his cranium, but we haven't heard from tonight, not to put you on the spot, but just to, you know, as an example. It's going to take all of us bringing our best threads, all of us bringing our best threads together, right, and contributing them. Some of us are experts in food, others in agriculture, others in economics, others in philosophy, others in communication, right? That's just the essence of collective intelligence. Coming together, each bringing what we have, not each of us, none of us feeling like we have to have the whole answer or all the answers, but each of us bringing the part. The bumblebees are a great example. One scout goes out, comes back and does a little dance. Here's what I saw, right? What do you think? That kind of thing. So come prepared to dance. That's the bottom line.
Hey, as people are starting to peel off, just before everybody leaves, we're, I don't know how many of you know who Stuart Brand is, and the Whole Earth Catalog legacy, but we're, I work, kind of run the business side of a company called Reinvent. I don't know if you know Peter Leiden, former managing editor of Wired Magazine. We do these monthly events in San Francisco called What's Not San Francisco, and Stuart Brand is going to be our guest on June 7th, which is at the 50-year anniversary of the Whole Earth Catalog, and it's going to be a reunion of sorts. We'll probably have about 200 people. It's free, invite only, open bar, food, really, high-end thing. But I'd like to invite all of you to be my guests on June 7th with our Stuart Brand, and it's in South of Market at a place called the Applied Innovation Exchange. But you're all really smart people and really interesting people, and that's the whole point of this series, is to bring. In fact, the idea of the series is a survey of innovation that's happening among industries that are characteristic of the greater Bay Area. And of course, that's a pretty broad palette. But this coming month, we have to have Stuart Brand. It's going to be an awesome one. So I just wanted to highlight, and I'm Brad at Reinvent on the email list. So you'll find me there. I'll have all your emails, and I'll shoot you back a link to where you can RSVP to that. But I hope you can join us there. I lost 10 or 12 people, but we'll get the word out to the rest of them.
Yeah, actually, can I just ask, is everyone okay that this email list that everyone sees everyone else's email? Raise your hand if you're okay with that.
I'm okay with it. Yeah.
Everyone okay with that? Okay.
Cool.
All right.
Good question. You don't want to always assume that.
Right.
When is your event?
It's June 7th, which is, I think, a Thursday. We do this every month, so we've got great, we had the most fascinating people, in biotech and, artificial intelligence. We had Paul Hawken, a year ago do it was literally the release of his drawdown book. Yeah. We had him as our featured guest at that moment in time, which is, I'm not kidding. And this is a fairly, this isn't a place where you're typically going to see a standing ovation. This is a speaker series, right? You got, 150, 200 people in the room. After Paul was done, and I know many of you probably know Paul in this room, but I have to say, there was about 3 seconds of just perfect silence, and then everybody stood up and gave him a standing ovation for about a minute, which seemed like a lifetime in that particular context. So we do some fun stuff. So get on our, I'll put you on our list, and we'll keep you on it so you can join us for future things as well.
Can you tell us the details through that email list?
Yeah, basically, I'm gonna once I get this list, I'll just shoot you an email with a link to our event with Stuart Brand. It's an Eventbrite link, and once you're on our list, we will keep you on our invite list for more. So, yeah.
Good. No, and that's a great example of collective intelligence.
Yeah, totally right.
These are manifestations.
Oh, you're talking.
Sure. Thanks. These are manifestations of collective intelligence. And I truly believe that if we make it through this bottleneck of abrupt climate change and the sixth extinction, it will be because we learned how to come together as a hive. We figured this out collectively. Yeah.
Either that or Elon Musk is going to figure out how to colonize Mars and survive his little 2,000 people communities in space.
Either way we're set. So, yeah.
I think we're all in the same plane here and thinking the same way, and we talk very rationally, and the slides were very rational. But I'm looking so often. How do I turn it off?
Leave it on, leave it on. You're doing great. You're doing great.
But I really agree with the gentleman over there, and I'm so glad you spoke. Finally, I'm grateful for her question, even though she's gone for pulling you out. And so I'm in mental health, I'm in climate. And the human brain, the motivational part of it, I'm sure Bill Gates is incentivized by money and glory and all. And that's tied into that dog brain, right? And so what is it that keeps that charged? And whatever keeps it charged, we know that from human research, we go towards the carrots, not the sticks. So we can motivate through fear, or we can motivate through incentives. And what really incentivizes us, certainly money, but also do-goodism, right? So the companies that can have benefits as well as sustainability or a little bit of profit will go for those benefits too. And so I'm wondering how we can incorporate for that visual brain. The dog brain really gets visuals, right? Kids get taught really well with those implicit as well as explicit images, and they last forever. We're still living from what we don't know we saw when we were 3 and 8 and 16 and lusting for everything. And so I'm wondering how we can continue as we go forth through emails and in our neighborhoods and with preschoolers and whoever we're talking to on campuses and one another, how we can keep those visuals going with the narratives, because those stories appeal to that tribal caveman part of us. And our 3 millennials, I just have to say, I'm aghast in their mid and late 20s and ex-Googleites, etc. They don't have the fire under their arse of the urgency that we feel. And they think their generation is just, not all millennials. I don't know how we got 3 that think that their planet of that age is going to solve the problems that we caused. But so when I'm talking with them, there isn't that urgency, and I get a little frustrated and a little activated in my nervous system, but also to borrow from their hope, because their hope is what keeps me going. If I don't have hope, I'm just going to drip and not write those emails and say. So I remember from when I was a preschool mom, and they were teaching us moms that when you have your second kid, how to tell the first kid that they won't be wiped out of love. And she said, you have a candle, and when you bring over a second candle, does the first candle lose its flame from the second candle? No. The wick, it just passes it on. And the third. And so JFK, we just heard JFK Jr. on the Riverkeeper guy, about how he was one of 11. How on earth did they do that? Well, I guess the flame keeps going. So how we can spread the hope to keep our own energy, because it's a challenge. And I guess so all different silos, even if they're locked in their silos, as long as they keep their energy, and then others that are more globalist and more abstract can kind of link it together and keep their energy. And so I don't know what I said.
That was great.
That was great. I just wanted to come back to millennials. I think we do have to ignite hope in them. I teach with a lot of 20-year-olds and their staff, and they don't have hope. They tell me when I talk about abrupt climate change, they know what's going on, and there's no hope, so why the f do anything? So I think we need to inspire them, like you.
They inspire us.
Could I ask Professor Mark here something? I believe that there's a little bit of a controversy amongst climate scientists that if they promote that it's hopeless, then they lose all the incentive. They're unable to motivate people to do anything. But if they tell the truth, if they tell the truth, then people will just kind of fade away and it's all hopeless and messy. But on the other hand, I mean, maybe you told, but certainly Professor Jacobson is hopeful. He thinks he's optimistic. He thinks we can solve the problem. We've got the answers. We can handle it. So what do you think? Where does the climate science community come down on that?
Haven't done a survey of that. Would you give an academic answer? I don't know on the one hand or on the other hand. I think that different people have different views on it. I think actually that climate scientists and energy analysts, I'm not actually a climate scientist, I'm an energy analyst and a cost-benefit analyst and environmental impact assessment person, so I can't really speak for climate scientists. But I do know from the work that we've done that everybody has an agenda, or many people have an agenda, and that makes it difficult to get a coherent message out. So I'm answering sort of a broader question, which is, we don't speak with one voice for a variety of reasons, and they have to do with professional agendas and egos and maybe even commercial interests that tend to push people in different directions. So I'm not hopeful, actually, that there will be a unified message from the research community, at least not a completely unified message. I am more hopeful that groups like this one can channel the positive opinions that people have about renewable energy and about making certain changes, at different political levels from the local level we've talked about here, but also, of course, at state and national, international levels, because you have to act at all of those levels. And so you have to write the mayor of Berkeley, and then you have to think about what people you want to vote for senator, replace Dianne Feinstein eventually, for example, what policies you want to have in place, what kinds of people will support those policies if they're elected, because it matters at all levels of government. So I have more faith in people eventually electing representatives who have the right policies in a very practical sense. And I think that, really, this might shock you, I actually don't think that the messaging from researchers, the nuances of it, is that important.
Do you think if we...
I don't know if Mark would agree with me on that, Mark, but I don't think that the nuances are that important.
Thinking from the hopelessness of millennials, which I guess is at least present in some of them, and maybe a lot of them, if we had a narrative that included, if we did this and this and this, then we would be able to achieve a sustainable economy or sustainable environment. Would that be something that scientists could get behind in some way that's consensus?
Yes, some scientists. But there's a lot of disagreement in the research community about what may seem like details to some people, but aren't details to us. So I'm sorry to be sort of disappointing that way, but I can't say that scientists as a whole will get behind anything. If there's disagreements, we could have a long conversation about the risks and benefits of geoengineering, for example, and I have something to say about that. And there's questions about the role of nuclear power. There's questions about the role of bioenergy. What do we mean by renewable? There's questions about the role of expanding hydropower. There's questions about, gee, we don't just care about climate change, we care about air quality. Oh, we care about water quality, we care about water use, we care about habitat destruction, we care about the interaction of the energy system with the land system and the water system, and we care about social justice and environmental justice, or we ought to, I think, but a lot of scientists have different views on aspects of each one of those problems about what's important. One final thing that I think is really important to remember, I think it's actually a big problem that a lot of my colleagues have bought into the idea that we can only think in terms of market incentives or market solutions. That the idea of large-scale visionary thinking, of social planning, of having big infrastructure projects, of changing patterns of developments, of building new things, is off the table. And all we can do is tinker with the price of gasoline, or a carbon tax, or a cap-and-trade system, or some kind of incentive like that. And that can be useful, but it's actually not even necessary. But many of my colleagues have bought into that mindset that they have to think in those terms for a variety of reasons that I won't go into. And
funding? Is it funding and grants?
That's a big problem, because if there's only so much you can do by tinkering around the margins with prices, right? I like to say
it's basically tuning up a broken car. You know what I mean? What we're talking about is a shift that's at once every several hundred years or several thousand year level of shift. I mean, we're talking about the Industrial Revolution, the agricultural. I think we actually are at a time where, when you look at a planet with finite resources and a clock that's counting down to a point when our own survivability is in question, we're talking about some kind of a massive shift that's at that scale. I mean, and I can't speak to exactly what that is, but I think you're right that it's not going to be fixed by tinkering with the margins in the market economy that we're sort of guided by currently.
But then, Mark, if that's true, what do we do about that, since researchers can guide policy at a pretty big level if we want? What do we do about the differences in there?
Well, here I'm hopeful about some changes that I think I have read about in younger generations. So in the area of transportation and land use planning, which tend to go together, for example, the common narrative among transportation economists and land and city planning economists is that we have to tinker with prices of cars and prices of fuels, and we have to be careful not to do really anything else. However, it appears, for example, that younger generations are much more open to the idea of developing cities and having modes of transportation that are cleaner, involve more transit, involve greater livability, involve greater walkability. None of these things can come about by tinkering at the margins with market prices. They require vision, planning, design, infrastructure, organizational changes.
Shifts,
And
no status quo.
the fact that the younger generation seems to be more supportive of that than older generations is critical to me, because that suggests that they'll be willing to support people, initiatives, and politicians who aren't beholden to this old, ridiculous market incentive, the current captains of industry's opinions all that matters point of view. And I'd like to encourage that, and I try to encourage my colleagues to get away from this. I have a saying that in transportation, I use to illustrate what I'm talking about in the energy area, which is that whatever you think of the interstate highway system, it was transformational. And we didn't get the interstate highway system by putting a tax on horse manure. But this is exactly what people are imagining when they talk about, say, taxing gasoline or taxing carbon. We're not going to get the new energy world, which involves infrastructure changes and organizational changes. Everything is different at scale and in terms of interconnectedness, and you can't accomplish that by these simple market changes. That's a message I'd like to get across.
Well said. Yeah, outstanding. I think you know, one of the reasons that a lot of researchers gravitate towards that is because you've got some very savvy energy companies that reward that position, right? And that's a big elephant in the room. And I think that as a tool-using species, I think a lot of these researchers you know, leverage certain arguments or certain studies that are very narrow. Again, back to Bill Gates, he routinely cites and quotes Professor Pinker of Harvard, who, you know, writes stuff that, you know, maps to his worldview, that greed is good, hoarding is good, and, you know, capitalism is making the world better, and the world's a much better place today. Look, you know, the percentage of people living on less than $2 a day has decreased, you know, these little statistics, right? So again, as a tool-using species, Bill Gates takes that as a tool and uses it to justify any number of things, right? So likewise, the myriad researchers around the world who are justifying their, you know, marketplace solutions and carbon taxes and whatnot. What is the antidote to that? The antidote to that is a higher level of thinking. The antidote is collective intelligence, because with collective intelligence, the minute a Professor Pinker puts forward some ridiculous assertion, the collective intelligence can pick it apart, dismantle it, and say, here's your broken car, right? And here's your, you know, broken emissions system, and broken this and broken that. Because otherwise, if we're all fragmented, each of us can grab whatever fragments we want as a tool-using species to justify pretty much anything. And it gets down to the lowest common denominator, our current story, that we're still stuck in. I'm still stuck in it to a large degree, which is that the more I hoard for myself, the better I'll be. You know, I'm very enlightened when we're in this kind of a circle. But watch me when I'm, you know, behind my computer screen making money, right? And I'm a different organism. That's just reality. That's just a hard, cold reality. So the antidote, I again maintain, is coming together and dancing together.
Any more quiet types? Yeah, I'm looking at you three. Okay. Before, actually.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I was just,
And your neighbors.
I'm just wondering if anybody would like to maybe wrap up, spend the last 5 minutes with a little McPherson bashing.
Oh.
Anyone?
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
I thought you're going to lead, right?
No, I'm not.
Oh. Well, I already spoke about hope.
He wants to do some McPherson bashing.
I can do some McPherson bashing.
What is wrong? To what extent is McPherson wrong?
Well, you may not be.
Or
We don't know anything, but I'm afraid I missed the session 2 months ago, but I was at, when you had Guy McPherson here, maybe a year or so or something, and so unless he's radically changed his position.
No, same basic thesis.
Maybe 9 years now instead of 10 years ago. Oh, hopefully that. Oh, is he? Oh, well, that's a good sign.
Because he only had 9 months then.
As far as working on solutions, he's hanging out with Jamin now.
He even infected him. Yeah.
No, but it's interesting. 2 months ago.
He's not going to see this, is it?
Pardon?
He's not going to see this.
I hope he does see it. Hey, Guy. So no, 2 months ago.
Just kidding, Guy.
2 months ago when he was here, we spent a few days together and netted out that we've got to refreeze the Arctic or we're toast. And so he was on that for a bit. And then the amount of flack that I've gotten through my YouTube channel for publishing that it was pretty amazing. But most of the flack came from people who had already bought and swallowed and digested his message that we're dead. And so, sweet, I can just smoke weed and, travel, and, because there's nothing we can do anyway. And so it was kind of like Guy McPherson had announced, school is canceled for the rest of the year. Everyone's just partying and woo, and then a few months later you hear on the megaphone, I was wrong. There actually is something we can do. So come back to class, and they were pissed. Oh my goodness, were they pissed? But these were the true believers who were the most pissed off, right? So, and then Guy McPherson promptly, essentially reversed himself and said there's nothing we can do. I guess that's what happens when he hangs out with Jamin Shively too long, too much time with Jamin. So, but anyway, bash away. I mean, I love Guy, and I'm grateful to him that he has sounded the alarms, right? Whether he's still playing with matches or not, that's a different story. But he did sound the alarms, and there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who got the message, however correct, however fuzzy his logic. And so, thank you, Guy. Now, where do we go from here? It's time for the solutionaries to come together. Guy McPherson is, every once in a while he dips his toe into the solutionary pond, but he doesn't hang out there too long. So it's going to take a different, it's going to take us and people like us. And there's a bunch of us out there, we just don't know that each other exists. Berkeley, you lift up a rock and you'll find Armando hanging out there with some radical solutions. But the rest of the world isn't like it. So you're going to have a hard time getting critical masses like this together in places outside of Berkeley. That's why Berkeley and the Bay Area, the greater Bay Area, is so darn important for this. So we can lead. And that was the original, that was part of the original thesis of the John Muir series, for which this is part 3, is the Bay Area is special, very special. So this is the land of revolution. Gay rights, LGBTQ, all came from here. The computer revolution, free speech. So look at this. So, and yet we're a sleeping giant nowadays. Look, even Armando's asleep.
Well, but the revolution had a vision, and it was a visual, right? So it's that right hemisphere again, a very primitive visual cortex, the back third of the brain. It had a vision. So when I heard Guy a year ago, I didn't hear him 2 months ago, we only had 9 months left. And I had no vision for what to do or where to go. I mean, how could I get into action? Because I didn't have a vision, I didn't have an instructional manual. And they were doing their thing down in the Southwest, and it sounded wonderful. They were giving conferences and stuff about how 9 months left. And I wasn't going to go spend money to hear more about 9 months left. I needed a vision. So some of these slides, some of what we're kind of putting together now tonight, these things give me a vision of going forward, because if we're going to change, that's into the forward. So I would say I wouldn't bash anybody, but I would certainly light flames under anybody who can give me more warmth and more flame too.
Can I say, in McPherson's defense, he does advocate right action without being too attached to the income, or the outcome. So I mean, certainly, he really does not advocate sitting around doing nothing and just smoking weed and getting drunk. Although that might be okay too. But anyway, so I just wanted to throw that in.
Great.
Also, there's a lot that can be done. You guys probably know that as well as anybody, with land use change and mitigating what's now a positive contribution to global warming from land use change. There's been some recent studies on afforestation, reforestation, restoration, rehabilitation of degraded lands, repairing of riparian areas and wetlands that show a surprising, to me anyway, surprisingly large potential sequestration, carbon dioxide removal, that also has many other co-benefits in terms of water quality, species diversity, habitat restoration, that sort of thing. These are in addition to, for example, the benefits that you get just by completely decarbonizing and cleaning up the energy system that Mark showed. And they're, in some cases, they're not as long-term, but they're the same order of magnitude. So there is actually a potential to do really good on multiple fronts environmentally, not just climate change. I believe that. Whether you have the technical and political will to do it as quickly as some people have wondered if we can, I don't know. But there's certainly technical and economic hope in my view.
Yeah, I just wanted to, sure. You know, I think there was a lot of logic in what Guy McPherson said, and I think we need to take him very seriously. And this is why I brought up the idea of geoengineering before. And that something needs to be done in the near future to avert the crisis, so that we have enough time to make these changes. And I'm still not hearing this addressed, but maybe it's not exactly as dire as he said, but my suspicion is it's close to that. And the reason being is because of the methane in the Arctic and the collapse of the jet stream and the missing ice. And we can't forget about that. We need to take what he's saying really seriously.
Exactly. Yeah.
I agree with you this time in the sense that I think there's a really nice piece of the narrative I keep going back to, which is the methane thing. And so some people argue that if you focus on methane only, that's the thing to focus on right now to solve the climate problem. And the basic reason is because it's a terrifically bad greenhouse gas right after it's emitted, and then it gradually deteriorates into CO2 mostly over time. So the first few decades of the methane release is just hideous, and that's the timeline we need to act in. And so we can't. And so the methane so there's a tipping point methane, but there's also the methane that we're leaking through all of the exploration and transportation and refining and storage and trucking, all that. All the methane that's released, because natural gas, as you all know, is almost all methane. So all the natural gas infrastructure, from our gas stoves all the way to the mines that sometimes blow up and PG&E blows them up, all that stuff's leaking methane all over the place. And the result is that the natural gas, the clean fuel, the bridge fuel, is actually worse for the climate than coal. It's not worse for the land and the water that coal is wrecking also, but it's worse for climate because methane is a much worse greenhouse gas than CO2 is. And so if we focus on just saying that methane is the thing we really need to hit on now and in the next 10 years, and if we can get the methane problem, not only do we prevent those tipping points of the clathrates that have the 14,000 gigatons of methane, but we also fix our energy structure and so on. So I'm saying that I think that no matter how desperate it is, that if we can focus on the visual of the methane problem as the one we need to work on first, that's not a bad narrative.
But the point I'm making is that we're out of time, and that's my concern. And I realize not many people are concerned with that here, but I really do feel like we're out of time. And 3/4 of the ice is gone in the Arctic, and there's a good chance it'll be ice-free in September this year. And we're going to see changes, big changes, in hurricanes, fires, droughts, the ability to grow crops. That's coming up soon. And it needs to be, I think it needs to be addressed, and developing these, if we're going to use geoengineering to address it, that takes a lot of time. It takes pilot studies, it takes a lot of work to get that going. Now there are no programs at all, basically, in geoengineering. So, but I don't really see anything else saving us.
Yeah.
And giving us the time that we need to make all these other changes that we're talking about. I think the issue at hand is we have to do something about overheating the planet.
Yeah. What if there was a benevolent dictator who had all the resources? Is there a jurisdictional problem for him to just do that solution while we decrease the methane and get rid of the cows that make a lot of it too? Is there a jurisdictional problem to putting?
That's one of the issues of geoengineering, is because any old billionaire can actually induce a solution. As you were saying, it takes $5 billion to do the solutions. So actually, any billionaire can say, "I'm going to solve climate, or I'm going to prevent climate," and that's one of the issues. Is because we don't know what the unintended consequences are, and it isn't that hard for a non-governmental, Bill Gates or whatever, Richard Branson, can actually try a geoengineering solution. So I think that's one of the dangers.
Yeah, but that's something. That's why we have things like the Paris Agreement. I mean, we need to get countries together to agree on these things and make regulations. And I think there are regulations in place in the United States that prohibit that unless it's agreed to. But there's an international effort, just like we want to. I mean, the international effort to keep the temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade, which looks like it's on the verge of failing, is part of that solution. May be geoengineering at this point, because we're not having a lot of success keeping the temperature less than 2 degrees centigrade. We're not there yet. I understand, but we're emitting fossil fuels we're accelerating the emission of fossil fuels. Carbon dioxide is increasing.
Down one to go.
So I mean, we're not there. I don't see how we're going to make it. I don't see how we're going to get through without doing something to cool the planet and refreeze the Arctic, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And 50% of the warming now is not due to carbon dioxide. It's due to the loss of albedo in the Arctic, the loss of snow on the tundra, and the loss of ice in the Arctic. So that's 50% that's just there, whether we emit carbon or not. It's nothing to do with the carbon.
Yeah.
And eventually it's going to be more than. Eventually it's going to just take over, and no matter what we do. So I think we need to take climate really seriously.
No, and I agree with you. We are like a grade B- movie in the 70s where this car is bashing through barrier after barrier. We just keep bashing through tipping point after tipping point. There's not that many tipping points left. I'm agreeing with you. To that point, how many of you have heard of the book, Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change? Please raise your hand if you, okay. And now keep your hands up. How many of you read the book? How many of you actually read it? Okay. It's a brilliant book, and it goes into the psychology of how, no matter how big things are, no matter how bad things are getting at a planetary scale, our brains really, we don't really register that. We're too busy, focusing on, food and, social status, sex, things like that. But the book makes a really good point. There is one thing that really wakes us up and gets us out of our chairs and ready to take action. And that is an enemy tribe that's coming to kill us and steal our women. Okay? That will, we're just wired for that, right? That's just how our brains work. With that in mind, seeing just how urgent it is that we do something this summer, that's why I broke out my Darth Vader costume. Big sign. And yes, I'm going with the message of abrupt climate change, but I'm also heading south to the border and to Texas, the southwestern states. with a message of eradicating criminal drug cartels. There's an enemy tribe that's coming to kill us and steal our women. Now, how does that connect with climate change? Here's my message. The big message is this, the big strategy is this. We're going to eradicate criminal drug cartels, which we can do with the stroke of a pen by repealing prohibition. It's not quite that simple, but it's almost that simple. As a first step to eradicating all forms of organized crime, including all the traditional mafias of the world and everything, including organized crimes against Mother Earth herself. Until we see an enemy tribe coming through that door, coming to kill us and steal our women, we're just not going to get that fired up. We as a species, we are fired up because we're a bunch of Bay Area progressives and, you know, we're special. But how do we get the rest of the knuckleheads fired up? Right? Criminal drug cartels. Well, it's a hypothesis. I can't prove it. But I'm going to put it to the test, and I'm literally going to put my life on the line. Because I'm going to go to the U.S.-Mexican border, to various crossings, and with a microphone like this one, I'm going to serenade the criminal drug cartels with Spanish love songs. Right? I'm not kidding. I'm seriously going to do this. I did this in Oregon on my way down here. Portland, Ashland. I've done it in Seattle dozens of times, and now we're taking it national. I'm just giving an example of the extremes to which I'm willing to go personally to wake people up. And I might take a few bullets in the process. You may not see me here in the fall, right? But damn it if I'm not going to do everything I can to wake people up. And this is one of those things. Thank you.
I shouldn't be clapping, should I?
And the bullets are working.
We're going to get him a bulletproof vest.
I think he meant bong hits.
I have a really, I'm humiliated to ask this question because I'm so naive and it's going to sound really superficial. But what if all of the Arctic Circle countries, maybe everybody in the Northern Hemisphere, and they can do the reverse for the Southern Hemisphere, for the South Pole, but you know, they make artificial snow. And so what if we put like 2% GDP from all our countries into artificially re-endowing whatever it is up there right away, short term, to buy time?
It's hopelessly naive. Actually, the countries are all trying to, a lot of the countries that have a stake in the Arctic can't wait for the ice to melt so they can drill for more oil. Russia in particular, which has a gigantic boundary, can't.
Oh my God.
The other answer to your question is it'll melt.
What's that?
Finland does not agree.
Well, I agree, but look, I mean, Canada, I mean, yeah. Justin Trudeau has just not been quite as pure as we had hoped, and so, I mean, whatever. So I think that the problem is that there could be a countervailing force, but boy, there's a lot of money in Arctic oil.
Yeah, talk about 2% GDP. That's roughly what is given to the oil companies globally in terms of
subsidies.
Subsidies, yeah, thank you.
Quite literally, yeah.
No, it's ridiculous. And why is that? It's because the governments of the world, broad brush speaking, are controlled by the oligarchs. And there's a huge chunk of the oligarchs who made their money off of oil and continue to make more money off of oil and gas. They're addicted.
The oligarchs.
The oligarchs. The oligarchs.
But they have grandkids too.
No, well, the oligarchs, well, heroin addicts have grandkids too. Does that stop them from shooting up? Like I told you, Bill Gates is the biggest heroin addict on earth. His particular flavor of heroin is money. It's that simple. He's got kids too. And he could be doing a heck of a, look, he could be bankrolling geoshading by himself. But that goes against his addiction. He wants more money, not less. That's the problem.
Well, we're all the problem. All of us are part of the problem, and we all drive cars. I took an airplane to get here, so that's consuming the petrol, gas also. So maybe we have to stop driving our cars and, you know, start riding bikes and walking and get our horses back out.
Yeah, well, here, look. I'm going to drive to the border, partly because I've got all the equipment and everything in my car. And the way I justify that, again, we're part of a tool-using species, I think of it as burning rubber, right? Think of the Dukes of Hazzard scene where they need to clear some river or something. They burn some rubber, fine, maybe it's not best for the tires, but they get over to the other side. So we're going to need to burn some rubber to get from here to there, I believe. I'm willing to burn some rubber. So keep flying when you need to. No, really, because we need you here in this conversation. Tonight wouldn't have been the same without you.
I'll come up with my horse next time,
Okay.
Jamin.
So you raised your hand.
Oh, yeah.
You keep chilling.
I was just gonna push back on that, like needing some enemy tribe to take our wives. I don't really think that it's true on one level, but I think we also need some solid leadership. Yeah. And I think if we had leadership that was embodying the qualities and getting the objectives done, we wouldn't need these false enemies. Because you don't want to fall into the whole like MS-13 or animals kind of like fascistic, like othering in order to motivate people in the short term. People are pretty motivated, but you know, we have this like deeply destructive American culture that we're contending with. And I think we can't like write that off and we wonder why we're not getting to where we're needing to go. You know, these powerful counter forces are kicking ass. So I just say that to push back on the this more tribalistic fear fight mechanism as the thing that's going to save us.
Maybe good leadership hits both parts of the brain, and they appeal to the lust that may have higher values for us as well. But it can't just be abstract and rational, right?
You're aiming that microphone.
I was aiming it right there. And the fellow next to you, we haven't heard from you.
But one thought that, since you did that has occurred to me is that I've learned about over the years, met a gentleman, Professor Pete Richardson at UC Davis, who's one of the fathers of modern cultural evolution. And I met him about 10 years ago and got to know him. And he taught me a number of things, and I wrote a paper with him and so on and so forth. And one of the key facts that I learned was about the notion of tribal social instincts. And going to your model of what we know how to do in this situation of climate change, we don't know how to cope other than to defend ourselves against the other tribe. Those, historically, and good science shows that the people who defended themselves successfully against the other tribe and lived to tell the story had more cooperation within the tribe. And that was called tribal social instincts. And that cooperation you can call, if you will, altruism. It's not something your mother just taught you, some more than others. It's in our genes. Altruism is in our genes. Our ancient tribal instincts to kill the other tribe are also in our genes. Meanwhile, the neoclassical economic model has taught us that it is only the greed and the ability to teach, to kill the person in the other tribe. And that's all that's in play. And that has unfortunately set up our whole Western economic system. And our business schools, our economic departments, and all our universities are teaching our students that that is the game. And there is growing evidence, and there's very good science that can prove that if you do tests and work with human beings to do experiments, that it's called the rational instincts hypothesis, that it's only greed, that does not explain human behavior. And that you need to add in the tribal social instincts to do that. And so from my point of view, when I learned that, I got very excited because I teach in a school of sustainable management, and I realized that science supports the fact that what we teach is more naturally human. Humans are designed genetically to do business sustainably. And that's all good science. And the reason you haven't heard about it is that it's just growing within the scientific community. There's not enough support within the community. There's a lot of experimental science research that is more and more supporting that. Okay, and it's just not gotten over the threshold of becoming mainstream. There's too many neoclassical economists out there who are just keeping it at bay.
But
That's
it's
awesome.
already in the marketplace with the B Corps, right?
Exactly. The B Corps is a great example, still a small group, but growing. And that is the B Corp is a great example of that symbolizes that model. Absolutely.
Well, that's really wonderful to hear. I'd like to know more about that, Dwight. But that very principle that ultimately cooperation is more of a built-in function of nature than competition. And that's a myth that's been kind of put forth, that that's what nature's all about. It's all about competition. But interestingly, our friend Bruce Damer and his colleagues at the University of Santa Cruz this year were published in the August issue of the cover story of Scientific American was about their discovery of the origin of organic life, of the protocells leading to the initial amino acids and so forth, starting, without going into great detail, the actual origin of life was in these hot springs, but there's a phase called the progenote where everything is, all the cellular material is collaborating, is figuring out how to organize itself. And this is understood now to be a primary stage of evolution across all aspects of biology. So anyway, the bottom line is we are much more naturally collaborators than we are competitors. It's pretty fascinating, and that points that out.
Good note to end on.
Two more.
All right.
You're good at pulling that.
Lucia, you want to give us some final thoughts? Not to put you on the spot. No, that's right. Well, you know, in fact, well, while you're thinking about that, you know, you did mention it's in our genes, right? Collaboration, cooperation, altruism, it's in our genes. I want to add to that, there's a lot of stuff in our genes, right? A lot of stuff that can get triggered here, there, and everywhere, you know, including murder and, you know, alienation, othering, all this kind of stuff. So we need to orchestrate the turning on of the right parts of our genes, right? Our individual genes and our collective genes. I think collective intelligence is the key to that. There's no just like simple answer, right? Where is that expression in the world today? You see it a little bit, but you see a lot more of hoarding and sociopathy. So we've got a lot of heavy lifting ahead of us in the realm of collective intelligence. The good news is it's a lot of fun, as Michael and I and other colleagues and participants in the collective intelligence. Look how fun this is, right? Here we are working, right? No one's paying us to do this. And we're having a blast. I'm having a blast. This is filling me with hope that you all exist and are willing to hang out until 11:30 at night, you know, hashing this stuff out. So,
and we did have a shift with smoking, remember? It became chic to not smoke. There was always science against it, but there was always industry against the science. And then somehow, the new generation came, and then somehow it shifted. So I'm hopeful that there's going to be a shift in, it's okay to talk about climate, and it's okay to go for it. And maybe the masses are still clunky and hoarding and all that, but at some point it's going to be de rigueur to go with the minority science. an attitude.
So phase shift.
Yeah.
Just really quickly, as far as tobacco goes, if I remember correctly, there was also a professor from Stanford actually who was translated internationally and had a big impact in that shift. So maybe we have hope with the Stanford, authority. That's all.
Wow. Well, this has been absolutely amazing. I think this conversation has probably been the best that I've ever had here at the Sierra Club. Seriously, at the Sierra Club dinner. So I want to thank and commend you all for being here and being a part of it. We'll get the emailing list going, and we'll keep the conversation going, because what we need to do is a lot more of this, I believe.
Thank you, Jamin, for bringing us together.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, it takes a village, and I want to acknowledge and thank my queen, Queen Melianor, for being with me in all of this. She actually got me off my butt to take on these big challenges. So, a big hand for Queen Melianor.
I also just want to thank the First Nations people and honor them. We're on their land, and we didn't say that at the beginning, but I just want to say hawa to them, and to have our hearts always present with them. And hawa means thank you in Haida.
In addition to thanking Queen Melianor, Professor Mark Jacobson, I also want to thank Professor Lucia Garces-Loman and Dr. Mark DeLucchi for helping co-lead this. And all of you, and one final major thank you to all of us who are here, each and every one of us, and for everything that we've contributed, whether speaking, thinking, just being here, being part of the collective. And thank you. Thank you.